if you want to make a general statement, someone's been training a while, someone's a little bit older, we do want to keep it minimum effective dose because, training is just another stressor, and you have stressors in your life all the time, your job, work, family, stress, whatever. So you have a lot of stressors.
If you just start off kind of telling people a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey to where you are today, obviously a big deal in the strength and conditioning industry, but also kind of beyond that with all the mindset coaching and being a sort of super connector, that kind of thing. If you could just give people a little kind of introduction about what you do, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up, fat and then skinny fat and weak and insecure and shy and socially awkward and all those things. And not the greatest athlete. And every Saturday morning, you could see, if anyone's, I don't know if this is on video, but you can see I have wrestling action figures behind me. So I watch professional wrestling like WWF every Saturday morning. And I was like, man, I want to be like those guys, like a larger than life kind of guy, And in 1988, my cousin Christine started dating a professional wrestler who was like 6'5" and 230, 250, something like that. So and they lived 2 houses down. So I got to see him all the time. That kind of really got me like in the gym and amped up and doing all that. Then it just became an obsession. And, 5 years later, I graduated high school. I was 6 feet tall and 137 pounds. So it obviously wasn't working well for me, the typical hard gainer genetics. So the funny thing is, if it worked well, maybe I would have never gotten into fitness as a career, right? Because I would have just gotten fast results and I would have figured out something else, because like I initially went to college for communications, and I either wanted to get into broadcasting or filmmaking or something like that. And the funny thing is, when you look back at it now, like it probably wouldn't have worked out anyway because I was so insecure and quiet and shy. So things probably worked out the way they should have. So then I switched my major and decided that this was what I wanted to do. So I started interning in a weight room, and then spent the next 15 years learning everything I could. Internships, workshops, seminars, hiring coaches, reading every single thing, even before the internet, getting every book, getting every course, every certification I could. Opened up one of the first like underground warehouse style gyms, we were doing that. And it was very different at the time. Like you go back to 1994, 95, 96, like there's just really basically Bally's and Powerhouse Gym and Gold's Gym and World Gym and things like that. And that was it, really. Like, there was no sports performance. And so what we were doing was pretty unique. And nobody was listening to hip hop back then. Now it kind of dictates culture, right? But so you come into my gym and we were doing all that kind of stuff. We had sledgehammers and sandbags and tires and kegs and all this stuff back in 96, due largely to a book called Dinosaur Training by Brooks Kubik. And so we were the only place that was doing that was playing hip hop, that had, all kinds of aggressive shit going on. We kicked people out left and right. You had to earn your way in. You had to be referred, and then you had to try out to get in. So it wasn't like, oh, please let us take your money. So then I just went on to start, sharing stuff on the internet. So I started in 94, 7 years in. I started sharing stuff on the internet in 2001. I got on Dave Tate's site, who's like, a godfather in this industry, huge influence and lifelong friend of mine. Started putting shit out in magazines. And then, we fast forward to today. So I did a book with Penguin in 2007, had my own column in Men's Fitness for years. And then eventually what I realized was there's a lot more to it than just this. Like, and there's nothing wrong with just doing this. Like Louis Simmons did this his whole life. Connor Peterson does this his whole life. But for me, I was missing out on a huge component of personal development. Like I gotten so far and I was like, man, I got to push further. So I myself went on this, few year long personal development journey. And I was like, I really want to do this because it's helped me so much. I want to help other guys with this. So 10 years ago, we shifted a little towards more like you mentioned, like mindset, lifestyle, and personal development stuff for men. And I started doing these events and, this higher level coaching program. And so, that's kind of where we're at now. I've been doing the podcast for 9 years. We're coming up on episode 500, I think, next week. And I don't know. So that's kind of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So there's so many kind of threads I want to pull on there. The first one is, I suppose, you've always had this kind of maverick renegade sort of personality, right? So you kind of went against the grain. I guess there was a lot of, as you said, the Bally's, the Gold, probably a bit of like Jane Fonda style aerobics, but not a lot of the kind of stuff that you were doing. So I think it's interesting to note that, you've always kind of gone your own way, right? And kind of bucked the trend. And I think a lot of people would find that, that demonstrates even early on, and albeit in a limited way, a kind of certain confidence. And obviously you cultivated that hugely over the last, 10, 15 years, moving to California. And then I know you've moved back to Miami, but, I think that's really interesting. So there's a lot to dig in there. I'm going to start off with the physical, if that's all right. So
Sure.
more like training type stuff. So one of the things so I've learned a huge amount about from you and about training. One of the things that I found super helpful was this idea of sequencing. Not too many people talk about sequencing, right? People will say, well, you got to start off with your big bang for your buck exercise. When in fact, like, especially for people like me, and as you said, like a lot of people that you coach who might be over 35, over 40, that's not necessarily the best way.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about sequencing and about kind of how you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time it came to fruition for me was when I was super into West Side 20 years ago. And I remember watching the VHS tapes, and Louis recommended if you had weak hamstrings, do glute hams at the beginning of your workout 3-4 days a week. So I started doing that. But then I also noticed, with a hamstring pump, my squats feel better. Everything else actually feels better. Then I watched the VHS tapes, and Chuck Vogelpool, who's a legendary power lifter at 220, he would do like a million sets of rows and pull downs and everything before he moved to his main stuff. So I was like, that's interesting. That goes against everything. I didn't think that was how you're supposed to do it. And then I just started noticing, man, if you get a pump before, like everything does feel better. And then around that time, everyone was like, oh, just do 1,000 band pull-up bars before you bench. So I was like, okay, well, there's something to getting a pump before. And why don't we just get a pump everywhere and the muscles you're training? And certain old school bodybuilders did that. It was just never really talked about because, like, I think when I came up, and if you're old enough to remember this, everyone was like in the late 90s. I don't even remember what the influence was, but early 2000s, everyone was influenced by powerlifting. Yeah. Right? Me, Joe DeFranco, Zach Evanesh, Cressy, everybody was like all powerlifting, West Side stuff. We're all doing like a hybrid of West Side. So there was always that powerlifting mindset. But years earlier, a lot of smart bodybuilders that you never hear get credit for sequencing would always do leg curls and leg extensions before squatting, things like this. Maybe they do cable flies before benching. But when I started doing and talking about it more, it really was so foreign. I didn't invent anything. I kind of just refined it and figured out, because I'm super OCD. When I get into something, I go 100% all in. So I figured out, okay, what if we do this? How does that feel? What is it? All these different options. And I kind of figured out what works best for the majority of people most of the time, especially if you're older. But then also one of the benefits of it was, and again, I feel like this was like late 90s, early 2000s. Everybody got obsessed with these hour-long warm-ups. And it seemed like everyone had their 45-minute DVD on how to warm up and everything. Yeah. I was like, I hate doing this. What if instead of doing squats first and doing 45 minutes of fucking bird dogs and all this other stuff, what if we just did squats second or third or fourth, and I did leg curls and Cossack squats and a single leg RDL or whatever, like a split squat, and then did squats. Now all of a sudden I don't have to warm up anymore. So I just walk in the gym, I start doing my shit. I remember the first time I trained one of my buddies who's a world famous pro wrestler. And he was like, oh, you know what I love about this is we don't have to warm up. Your whole workout's kind of like a warm up built in. I was like, yeah, great. Because he's not super into training the way you and I are. He just does it like a necessary evil. So for someone like that, it was perfect. Yeah. Like if I had him come in and do all those little mobility drills for an hour, he's gonna be like, bro, this sucks. I gotta end this, which I get.
That applies to a lot of type A people, right? A lot of like CEO types. They're not going to want to be right. So you do your 45 minutes of foam rolling, then you got to do your activation. And, as you said, like,
and the thing is, I don't even know if it did that much because everyone I know was always beat up during those times. I was always beat up. And now I'm 48 and I can literally park the car, walk into the gym or walk into my own gym and start on my first exercise. Because I'm going to be sequencing it properly, so it's not going to be something that's going to break my back or my hips or my spine or something like that, And then in between, while I'm doing my ramp-up sets, maybe I'm doing internal, external rotation. I'm doing some stuff, in the rest periods in between. And even, let's say I start a push day with a machine chest press. So let's say I do 3-4 warm-ups. In between, I'm doing all the mobility stuff anyway. And then even during my work sets, I can do more stuff to prepare for the next set, the next exercise, So it kind of just made training, well, shorter for sure, but just kind of like, it just made more sense, you know?
Definitely more efficient. And as you said, more
Yeah.
fun. And the other thing is, I think it put people off. It's thinking about a 45-minute warm up. People would,
Yeah.
be more inclined to kind of skip training. So another two things I kind of want to tease out here that you've spoken about a lot that I think people would find really valuable, and especially people perhaps with, a longer time training, bit more training experience, is really managing volume and not doing junk volume. And then another thing that we're very concerned about is longevity and performance as we age. So including power work as well. So I know that you include jumps and throws and sprints and all that sort of stuff. So if you could talk a little bit about kind of managing volume, how you think about that, and then perhaps about other kind of longevity stuff like, the power work, for example.
Yeah. So I think you should always look at minimum effective dose, like do the least to achieve the results you want. There's no need to do more than that. And that's hard to give a general statement. If someone is brand new to training, they may just need more volume just for practice, right? Like you and I might be able to go in and say, all right, let's work up to one heavy or two heavy sets on this because we've been doing it forever and we're good at it. Or someone else will be like, oh my God, that guy's form is horrific. He should do 19 sets of this to practice, Yeah. But if you want to make a general statement, someone that's been training a while, someone's a little bit older, we do want to keep it minimum effective dose because, training is just another stressor and you have stressors in your life all the time, your job, work, family, stress, whatever. So you have a lot of stressors. Not everyone is 100% dialed in on their nutrition. Most people have too many stimulants in their life, not enough sleep, so it's just another stressor. So what are we actually trying to accomplish there? And for some people, it's like, oh, I just like to work out super hard. It makes me feel better. And I get that. Like it's iron therapy. I need to train too. But, to quote Pavel Tatzlin, which I thought was one of the best lines I ever heard, is what's the biological cost of your training? So if you're getting way more fatigued, your testosterone's going down, your sleep's going to shit, your immune system's getting compromised, your HRV's tanking, well, maybe you got to address other things in your life that you don't need such an escape and such, iron therapy. Like,
Yeah.
I get it. I need to do something every day or I'll lose my mind. But let's have, manageable volume that you can recover from. And I think that's where things like, wearables can come in handy if you use an Oura ring. And you don't have to do it forever because some people can actually drive them insane. But if you use an Oura ring for, let's say, 90 days or a Whoop or something like that, and you're like, okay, if I do less volume, my recovery score is better. I feel better. My joints feel better. Because that's the thing with your joints, most injuries are not catastrophic injuries. They're just slow accumulation of fatigue over time,
Yeah.
Sure, there's a catastrophic injury that happens in sports, or if you just go way too heavy and you collapse on a squat or something. But the majority of stuff that comes up, like, oh, my elbow, my shoulder, it's like, yeah, that was built up over 18 months of you just doing too much volume.
Yeah.
And now we have one of those overuse injuries, which unfortunately a lot of times takes 18 weeks or 18 months for it to completely go away, depending on how old you are.
Yeah.
So, do the least amount to get what you want and then only add more. And to do the least amount, you have to make sure your exercise selection is good. Your exercise execution is good. You're training, relatively close to failure. And that would be it. So for me, for my guys, we'll do maybe, and it's funny, sometimes if I'm training with younger guys or we're filming, I'll do more volume than I should and would recommend, the camera's on, whatever, and I'll pay for it. The next couple of days, I'm beat to shit. Whereas my last two workouts, I did exactly the volume that works for me. I did eight work sets and then 9 work sets. And today I feel great. I could train 3 days in a row. But if I start to push it to 16 hard work sets, because I like to train hard too. So if I do 16 or 18 or something, like, forget it. Next 3 days, I'm smashed. So just do the least amount. And that was, I think, when I graduated high school and I was the same height and the same weight, and I was getting nowhere, I was like, all right, let me look into some other stuff. And you got to remember, like, 90s bodybuilding was just all you had was Flex magazine stuff, and everyone's doing high volume stuff. So I'm looking at like Sean Ray and all these guys and Flex Wheeler. It's like, all right, that's not working for me. So 93, Yates hits the magazines and he's like, no, you do like 1 or 2 sets. And I was like, oh shit. So I started doing that. That's when I finally started making some progress. And that led me down a rabbit hole of Dr. Ken Leisner and super squats and Keys to Progress by John McCallum and all these guys who are more, lower volume kind of guys, Stuart McRobert or whatever. Mike Menser, obviously. Now, I think a lot of those guys took it way too far, because I think that's a myth for hard gainers too, is that you should do the absolute least and barely train. Like, you'd have some of those crazy hard gainer programs where you're training each muscle group like once every 7 to 14 days. It's like, that's terrible. Actually, if you have shit genetics, and that's a whole thing. Like, if you're a true hard gainer like myself, you have shit genetics, you have small joints, you have high cortisol levels, you have a low testosterone, you have just a whole milieu of horrible things for building muscle. And you have bad digestion too. So, you're eating, but then you're running to the bathroom, and it's a whole mess. So but you do need a good amount of frequency and a decent amount of volume. So there's a little bit of a misconception there, where it's not do the absolute least across the month or the week. It's like each session. Like, I'd rather have hard gainer type guys, or even type A stressed out guys in their late 30s and 40s, train like 5 days a week, but let's keep those 30, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, like maybe 8 to 10 top work sets, like I said. And frequency, I think for a lot of guys like that, like once every 4 days, twice a week, once every 5 days, something like that. I think once every 7's not the best either. So I'm going off on all these things. I could go all over the place with this. But
no, I mean, it's fascinating. There's so much I kind of want to pick up there. So I suppose one of the sort of first things would be, I think this idea, as you said, of like being like, it makes sense just from an intuitive perspective, right? Athletes, you mentioned pitchers, they have a pitch count, right? Rugby players in the UK, right? They're only allowed to play a certain number of games. So like in a sport, there's very carefully managed volume, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Why should we not apply the same? But you don't hear people talking about it, as you said, as much. So I think that's really useful. And I think also, when you say, and I know you've spoken about this a lot, so I don't want you to like blow a gasket, but people, like, it's 1 or 2 work sets, right? You will have done a significant number of warm-up sets to get to that point. So some people might write that down as like 5 sets. Yeah. So I think to make it really clear, you don't just sort of walk in and then bang on the heaviest weight. Like, it's a very kind of considered warm. Do you see what I mean? So that's like part of the warm-up. People make that mistake a lot.
Yeah. And I even started writing about this like in 2003, 4, 5 or something, where I was comparing the training volume of Dorian Yates to, let's say, Ronnie Coleman or other guys at the time. And I was like, there is actually a misconception. Everyone that you think Yates is the only guy who does 1 to 2 sets, but in reality, most of these guys actually do the same thing. They write it as 3 or 4 sets in the magazine. But if you ever trained with them, and back to Dave Tate, I heard Dave Tate speaking not too long ago that any bodybuilder who he ever trained with, they did that. They ramped up to 1 top set. And so there was a misconception like, oh, it's all high volume, but it's really not. Most of those guys are just working their way up. In Flex Magazine in 96, they're writing 4 sets, but they really did 3 ramp up sets and 1 hard set and then moved on to the next thing. Now, some of those I think are junk volume, where they would write, oh, I did 4 sets of 10 to 12, where the average guy with shitty genetics, if he's warming up on the first one, let's say, and doing 3 warm-ups, great. Does he need 3 warm-ups on the second one? Maybe, depending on the exercise. But then later in the workout, you're not going to need that many warm-up sets, nor you need to do warm-up sets of 10 to 12. Now that's junk volume. So let's say we get to the next, like the third exercise, you might just do 1 set of 5 and you're good. You might even just do 1 set of 3, move the pin, do a single, and now you're good for your warm-up set. So that's where we get into the excessive junk volume of where you're doing 3 junky sets of 12 on everything to warm up. You get to the end, if you're finishing with a ring push-up, you don't even need a warm-up. Just jump in and do 2 work sets or something like that. And you get to, let's say it's a push day, you're doing laterals. Maybe you need a warm-up, maybe you don't. Depends how strong you are, So don't just do 3 warm-ups because I said so, or whatever, do what you need. Do as little as you need.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think if people actually really thought about it, then they'd understand that. But often, as you said, there's not that much thought going into it. So another thing I kind of wanted to pick up on is this idea of being able to kind of perform outside the gym, right? And not being kind of, because this is another benefit of your training, not being like super sore all the time, like being able to do other stuff, not just, oh, I trained legs yesterday, so like I can barely, walk up the stairs today. I think there's a lot, especially people over 35, they want to perhaps play with their kids, or they want to go for a trail run or hike or go surfing or whatever. I think that's an important thing, as you said, because it goes to like biological cost of your training, right? If you can get there without having to do that, the destination, you actually get there, then why would you kind of cripple yourself? Although we've all been there, right?
Yeah. Well, I did it filming something recently, and then for 2 days I was like, why did I do that? I'm so stupid, you know? But yeah, it just makes a ton of sense. Like training should make your life better. It's kind of a weird thing that you're the fit guy and you're out with your friends who are stockbrokers or bankers or something. You're like, oh no, I can't do that. I can't move. My legs are destroyed from yesterday. And like, what? You know, they don't even get it. Yeah.
I think a lot of people will look at volume per workout and not equate it over the week and not add in, as you said, all the other stuff that they're doing. You know, perhaps they're doing some high intensity cardio, all that kind of stuff. So people always think weights is going to tax their recovery, but often like the sprints, the high intensity cardio, that actually has a big effect on the nervous system too, right?
Yeah, more so. So I would say, you know, a few things. First and foremost, strength training is going to be your first priority. So you always want to do that, and however many days makes sense for you, 3, 4, 5, whatever. You honestly, I think if your volume's managed correctly and your intensity, you can do 6 if you want. Low intensity cardio will be the next thing, and the last thing I even consider is high intensity cardio. Some people I don't even have to do it. Some people I don't have to do it for the first 3 to 6 months, and then usually it's one short session a week. And then as far as the workouts go, I do urge people to work harder. And so if you're working hard, you're really not going to need a ton of volume. You know, you might need 1 or 2 top sets per workout. Again, it's going to be individual. You kind of got to gauge it, but it gives some rules. I think, you know, per muscle group, somewhere between 6 and 10 hard sets a week is good. There's advanced guys that are jacked and strong that could get away with less than that, especially if it's a body part that responds well. If you're training really hard and it takes you, and you're really strong, it takes you a while to ramp up. I mean, you might get away with 3 to 5 sets per week, and that's totally fine. Like, why do more if you don't need more? You only get 1 set of elbows, 1 set of knees. You know, like
absolutely, and especially as you said, if you're strong and you have that capacity to push yourself, which you know it takes a while often to develop.
Yep, it does for sure.
To be and to push yourself safely as well. And again, something you've spoken about, picking the right exercise. So like, you know, you don't necessarily need to, I know this is kind of sacrilege, but you don't necessarily need to like barbell back squat, right? And that certainly wouldn't be the safest exercise to take to like all out crazy failure, right? You'd want to be on like a machine, something with more stability. I mean, I think this goes to kind of your, which I really like, this idea of, you know, you being a renegade. Like, you don't have to forget, like, do you still barbell back squat, for example?
No.
It's not necessary, you know, like, and if you're going to do it, I'd assume, you know, you'd use maybe a safety bar, elevate your heel, you know, there's all sorts of stuff. Have it, 3rd, 4th in the workout. So totally. There are all these ways that, you know, if you love squatting, you don't have to give up squatting. You know what? Keep squatting if that, you know, really makes you happy. But they're much more sensible and smart ways of doing it where it won't beat you up and you'll be able to squat in 20 years time rather than.
And then you got to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, which I always ask guys that are a little bit older. They're like, oh, I want to squat. I love squatting. And I go, okay, why? And they go, I go, well, what's your goal for squatting? Just do a bunch of weight for what? Like you don't even have a social media account. Who's going to care? Like, what are you doing? And so then I force them to dig a little deeper. They're like, oh yeah, you're right. And I go, so what do you want out of your leg training? Like, well, I'd like my knees and hips to feel better, my back. Okay, well, then barbell squats they're going to do that. Do you want to build your quads? Yeah, okay. Well, for your anatomy, barbell squats aren't the greatest exercise. Let's look at something else. I mean, even Yates did a Smith machine squat during all his years. And then some people are just, you know, they're just old school kind of purists. They're like, oh, well, Steve Reeves and Larry Scott and Arnold and Franco didn't do that. I was like, yeah, because they didn't fucking have access to it. They didn't have a pendulum squat and a hack squat. They weren't invented yet. Football players don't still wear those leather helmets. We don't ride around in a horse and carriage. Like, they just didn't have it. The stupid fucking argument, you know?
I totally agree, and that's one of the things that really gets me. It's the old school way, and you're like, yeah, sure, but like doesn't mean that, you know, there aren't better ways. You'd like to think we've evolved. You'd like to think that you know, you and I would be better people, you know, in 5 years than we were 10 years ago. And as you said, like, things improve, and take advantage of that, right?
I think one thing that's super important that we didn't cover is you got to go into each workout and assess how you feel that day. So not even just in terms of intensity or, trying to hit a PR or something, but even the volume. Like some days, maybe you're like, okay, perfect. I had 10 hard sets planned and that's what I could do. Some days you're going to feel like trash and you might only do 5 sets. And that's fine. Wrap it up and go home because you'll feel better tomorrow versus digging yourself a deeper hole. So always listen to your body. And that becomes more and more important as you get older. You're in your 20s. Chances are your testosterone's higher, your sleep's better, your recovery's better, whatever. You get older, you really just got to listen. So anytime I go into the gym, I really have no idea how many sets I'm going to do. Oh, I have an idea, but I don't know what weight I'm going to hit on those sets. I don't even know what my warm-ups are going to look like. I might only need 2 warm-ups on this exercise, and some days I might need 5 warm-ups on it, just based on how my shoulders or my knees or whatever feel. And then some days too, like we could make the argument that doing lower reps in general is going to be less fatiguing than doing higher reps. Sure. And anyone who doesn't understand that concept, just like, let's say, if I tell you to go run a mile, so picture it like this. You and I go train, Johnny. We do 10 sets and we do 6 reps on each. So we did 60 total reps. Tomorrow or a week from today, we do the same workout, but we do 12. So now we did 120 total reps. It's simple math, which one would cause a little more fatigue. We did double the work. Sometimes people don't, equate it like that. But in simple terms, if I said, hey, bro, go run a mile. And then I go, hey, go run 2 miles. Which one's going to be more fatiguing? Fucking 2 miles. You did double the work, right? So it's pretty simple math. However, it's a good rule on paper that, sets of 6 to 8 might cause less fatigue than sets of 12 to 15. But you got to add a caveat to that. That's where I have a problem with people who just stay up on the latest studies, because it's like, bro, do you have real world experience? You know that if on that day your shoulder feels like shit, a 6 rep max or even an 8 rep max is going to be hard. You might have to do 12 or 15 that day.
Especially if you're strong. Yeah.
Especially if you're strong. There's also the mental thing. If you're strong, you're like, Jesus, I got to work up to 4 plates on this thing today. It's like, fuck it. Let me just do 2 plates and do 15. So those are 2 huge things where, the younger crowd or the science guys are like, nope, this says this, we do this. It's like, yeah, but if you don't have real world experience, that goes out the window. You can't do that. It's based on how you're feeling that day. And it also takes a lot more ramp up sets. If we're going to do 12 to 15 on something, I might do 1 ramp up set. If we're doing 6, I might have to do 5.
Yeah.
So it's all these things come into play that you got to consider. And it could be body part dependent. Like, let's say you just have a fucked up shoulder, so all your pressing has to be 12 reps and above, but pulling, you're fine. You could do heavy sets of 6 to 8. Maybe every body part you could do that, but like, lateral raises kill, and you can only do 15 to 20. Like it's body part dependent, it's joint dependent. It could even be exercise dependent. Like some chest stuff, you can bang out 6s, and then dips, you're like, I could do dips, but not below 15 reps. So like, there's all these things you got to take into consideration.
The one thing that I was very big on, and that you're known for being very big on, which we haven't talked about that much, but is extremely important, and arguably the most important thing in the entire training kind of concept of the whole lot of training, it is this excellence of execution, right? So I'll use your word. I've never heard anybody else use it. If you're doing like schlacko reps, like really crappy, and
that's like a Northeast Jersey type of thing.
I know. Well, my wife used to live in Jersey, but it doesn't sound quite right with my posh English accent. It sounds much better coming from you. But if you're doing these, these schlacko, these horrible reps, that is not going to be, even if everything else, you've nailed your volume, you're doing the right exercises. Sure, all that's great, but like the rep and also that can be a form, as you've said, of progressive overload. If you go just from doing, crappy dumbbell presses, top range, and you're like, I'm pumping the 100s, sure, take the 70s and actually get full, like, safe range. Obviously, you don't need to, do anything crazy, but like a safe range for you, that's going to be extremely important, right? So it just maybe a few final words on excellence of execution and the importance of that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no physical endeavor that you would do that you didn't proactively chase that. If you started playing golf, you're going to get lessons to try to always improve your swing, always improve your tennis swing, shoot 1,000 jump shots a day like Kobe would or something like that. But with training, people don't think about that. They're like, yeah, whatever. I know how to train. I'm like, how do you know how to train? Do you know how to swing a golf club? Do you know how to ride a horse? Like, you need some,
Yeah.
professional instruction. So get coached, learn, like I said, excellence of execution, proper technique. It's wildly important. And then it's funny because, the pendulum always swings in the industry. So if you've been around for a while, you'll remember that in the 90s and early 2000s, nobody really cared about it that much. And people were like, oh, the form police are here, which there was always this weird form police thing. And then we swung all the way to the other end where there's like everyone's a biomechanics expert nowadays and this, and that's not optimal. And it's like they take it a little bit too far. But you want to have great form. Again, you only get one set of shoulders, one set of elbows, one set of knees. So why would you want to be doing them repeatedly with heavy weight? I mean, think about you get tennis elbow and golf elbow from doing something repeatedly with a lightweight, like a feather lightweight.
Yeah.
What if you're doing something with hundreds of pounds? You're obviously going to develop some injuries. So make sure, and it just allows you to get more out of less volume. If your form is terrible, then maybe you're like, oh, I do need to do double, triple the amount of volume because you're not getting that much out of each set. But if we really dial in your form's great. You'll need less. You'll recover much faster. You'll feel better. You'll get the gains you want. So I think it's just really important to prioritize that. And it's funny because just yesterday or the day before, one of my friends for 20 years, who's now 60, I met him when he was 40, one of my closest friends in the world, he came to train. We hadn't trained together in 6 years, and he still had a little of that powerlifting mentality because he used to train at my old gym, and he was kind of hoisting weight and everything. I was like, bro, you're 60. We got to tighten up your form here a little bit. We started with a machine chest press, and we go on to dumbbells on a low incline. I go, what do you think you're going to hit here? He goes, 85. So I go, Jesus Christ, you're not doing 85s. I'm going to give you 45s and make it really hard. And he's like, no way. I go, all right, since I know you're a maniac, I'll give you 55s, and I'm going to make it hard. And he hit failure at like 8 doing it the way I want him to do it. And he's been using 85s.